Everybody that's out there online at the moment, yes, we've got a few challenges that we have here in Australia. And the big buzzword at the moment, of course, is that we're talking about team building and we're talking about high-performing teams in particular. Now, my journey started many, many years ago. Obviously, I come from Ireland. And in 1987, I was pretty much sent out here on the boats, I believe. And I arrived here into Australia. But my journey took me on this search. I'd always been interested in high-performing teams, but more importantly, the history. Now, what is it that makes high-performing teams? We all know from an organizational point of view that, yes, having high-performing teams will basically give you the happy organization that you're looking for. But also from a sporting point of view, we all talk about sports and we talk about, who are the greatest teams of all time. My journey all those years ago, we're going back 24 years ago, Alison just mentioned 124 Kokoda Tracks. What that actually means is 124 Kokoda Tracks means, well, there's a track in Papua New Guinea, and that track was probably the most important track in Australian history, because if it wasn't for what they did up there in 1942, well, perhaps you'd be speaking a different language right now, and you probably would not have the freedoms that you currently have here in Australia. So put that in perspective. Let's spend a little bit of time there, putting it in perspective. 96 Ks, 124 times. If you put a set of hiking boots on the crow, well, that 96 Ks as the crow flies suddenly turns into 126. So 126 Ks, you do the maths on that, that's almost like 3.5 years walking full time. So 3.5 years walking full time. And what it does is it gives you access to so many great people who come from all walks of life, from all different states. Imagine that, from all different states. And guess what? They even have their own toilet paper. How good is that? From all different states up there onto this thing called a Kokoda Track. Now, my journey started many, many years ago, 25 years ago, when I went up there. And I'll never forget it, because when I landed up there on this little airstrip, most people didn't know anything about the history at that point in time. They didn't know what this track stood for. They didn't know that the freedoms that we currently have here in Australia, albeit limited at the moment, they were fought for in this particular area. And so when I got up there, I remember getting off this little plane. It was up in the middle of the mountains, and, well, the local people came out to meet me. And in those days, they had big, huge feathers on their heads, and they had bones through their nose, and they had all this paintwork on them as well. And I watched the other people as they approached some of these elders. And when it was my turn, the elder came to me and he looked at me, and I could see, well, everybody else had kind of made a mistake, because they're putting their own values, they're putting their own systems on these people. You need to have a fridge, because if you have a fridge, well, then you can have all this food. Whereas I was smart enough, I actually sat back and watched, observed. And when it was my turn, I turned around to the elder up there and I said, well, what do you actually need? What do you need? And he looked at me and he said, well, we don't actually need anything. And I said, well, that's the coolest thing. He said, because how our system works, we believe in our forefathers. We believe in history. We believe in where we come from. But how our system works is we put a crop in the ground. As long as it rains, we have food. Then what we do is that when it comes a normal day, we have strong people who will go out and become our farmers, while the kids remain in the village with the elderly people, our forefathers, the people who have done it. They now will pass their way, our way, down to these children. So our culture continues. And I looked at this, and I thought, wow, this is the coolest thing. I'd been all over the world with all sorts of different sporting organizations and different companies like Microsoft and Apple and Computer Associates. And I looked at this and thought, this is the coolest thing. And from that, I termed this word, it's called practical intelligence. And practical intelligence, what it actually means to me is that in our society, we've got so many people that stand up and tell you, blah, 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 but nobody actually shows you. So practical intelligence for me is the ability to show. Don't tell me, show me. And this is what they were doing. This is how they had succeeded. This